This episode is brought to you by Adaptive, Manoman Reson Timbers, and Pella Northland.
I think in any business that's like a startup like that, there's always like these kind of invisible people in what you present. We had one example where our cord sets for our lights didn't come in, and so I had to buy like the parts, and we would throw parties at our house on Friday nights. And we would drink wine and have people assemble cord sets. And we feed them food, you know, because it was like...
In building what you did with your friends, you'd move into a house, you would not pay the builder to paint your garage, you'd have all your family over, and you'd buy beer and pizza. You've taken this to a whole new level.
Yeah.
Before we get started, I just want to extend a thanks to Jackson and Schwartz, one of the co-founders of Hennepin Made, and his team for letting us host you all tonight in his wonderful space. And so how about a big round of applause for Hennepin Made. I'd also like to thank some of our event sponsors. I'll have them stand up here to be recognized. We have Synergy Windows, we've got Corey, and we also have Dave with Bell Mortgage. So all your food and drink are from those two individuals. We also have Auden Street. Where's Nicole and her team? Oh, right over here. So they have the photo booth in the back. You guys can ham it up however you want when we're done. And then also our season 1 sponsors. We've got Pella Windows. We've got Mark and Peter over here. So big shout out to Pella. We also have Eric Robertson from NRD Landscaping back here. Chaska Hawk, grad of 99, thank you. And I think that's it for our sponsors. So none of this could really happen without them, so very much appreciate that. So I guess without further ado, I'm Mark Williams. I'm the host of the Curious Builder Podcast. Welcome to our first live event. Thank you for coming out and listening to our show. So for those that'll hear this recording, we are in a killer vibe. You can check it out on video, but this is an amazing showroom. So Jackson, why don't you kick it off and tell us a little bit about the history of Hennepin Made and how you got started.
Great. Thanks everybody for coming and supporting us. It's always fun to gather in person. Still feeling good. So a little bit of background about this building where we're at today. This building was built in 1954. It's always been a glass factory, so it's got a really cool history. It was built by Ford McNutt, which was a window manufacturer. And so we're the third owner of the building. And so we feel like we're carrying on that torch, of glass. There was never any glass blowing in this building from what I know, but they did have a decorative division where they did stained glass windows and like church restorations. And in the back of the building, which was the city desk where architects and designers used to come in, there's actually a glass blower mosaic in the floor of, it's a terrazzo mosaic. So when we were looking for buildings, I was cold calling all around the city, because when you compete with commercial real estate developers, you don't really succeed when you're our size. So we were in the cold calling mode, and the owner of Bryn Glass at the time said, yeah, I'd be interested in selling this building too. Come on over. And I told him on the phone I did glass blowing, and he pulled back the mat, and it was like, I looked up to this, heavens, and was like, this is it. So it was pretty cool. It took about 2 years to be able to acquire the site, and that was back in 2016. And so this is our showroom, and then the building's split down the middle. The front half is Glass House, which is our hospitality business, our sister company, and then the back half is Hennepin Made, which is our artisan manufacturing.
Now I know that, so you have the wedding venue, which is the Glass House. Did that start right away in 2016, or did that kind of evolve?
Like most things that I'm involved with in business, it's kind of an accident, I feel like, but you'll learn, you'll kind of hear this theme. So that was a friend of ours who owned an ad agency. They did our brand, and we built out their previous space. So we helped them design and build it out in this warehouse in Northeast Minneapolis. And so they were going to actually move into the building and take over that space. And it was like I already bought the building. I was doing all the construction. I was managing on the side and stuff, and I was kind of like waiting. They were dragging their feet, and finally I had like, all right guys, we got to get beers and like actually decide if we're going to do this. And then they are like, we can't do it. Their business just wasn't in a position to do it. And so we were like, okay, what do we do with the space? In the meantime, I've always been really involved in art and kind of artists and connected artists. And so I had a friend who wanted to throw this magazine launch party for this art magazine, and we threw this kind of crazy like underground party. And then people just from there started asking if they could host stuff here. And so after about a year of that, I was like, all right, we got to actually like legitimize this thing or I'm going to get in trouble, you know, like from the city, or somebody's going to come in and shut it down. So then we're kind of like, okay, how do we turn this into like a legit business? So then from there, we like built the whole thing out.
So rather than some like rural high school party where there's like illegal liquor being sold in like a cornfield, it was like in the city in a giant glass house. So
yeah, that's pretty much it.
Way to get your liquor license. That's a good call.
Yeah.
Before we get too far down the road with what this amazing space has become, I'd like to go back a little bit to the beginning. And the book that you guys published is pretty incredible. If you haven't read it, it's in your bags and you can get it on your way out as well. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your history of how you got into glass blowing and maybe even your childhood. I don't know, was there other entrepreneurs in your family? And then walk us up through kind of your journey through school and down to Canberra, Australia before we get to Joe.
Yeah, okay. I have like no formal business training, and I didn't even know what the word entrepreneurial or entrepreneur meant until like well after I was one formally in our society. So I didn't really have that from my upbringing. My dad was an engineer, and my mom was a teacher. So my mom taught culinary education at the high school, and my dad engineered traffic systems. And so nothing to do with art or glass or entrepreneurial kind of endeavors, but they always encouraged me to be really curious. And so I grew up in the countryside, loved kind of like exploring in the woods. We grew up on like 5 acres of woods. It was amazing. So I had kind of the Tom Sawyer like upbringing. And so when I was in high school, I really loved making stuff. And the two avenues for that were shop class, and art, right? And so I was like, kind of extended both down to those pathways, and the art one really was fun for me because there was an expressive element to it, right? And so when I got into my last couple of years of high school, I'd seen glass blowing actually like on YouTube, and that was like I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like I got to figure out how to do this. And so I was really obsessed with it, and I knew the university had a program in River Falls where I grew up. And I was working at a pizza restaurant, and one of the other pizza drivers, the other delivery drivers were all in college. And I'm a 16-year-old, totally naive. And so I asked him what he was doing tonight. He said, well, I'm going over to the glass studio after work because I'm in the program there. I was like, are you kidding me? Can I come? And so I'd sneak in there at night with him and help make drinking glasses and stuff. And then there was a program through the university system where you could apply to college early, essentially. So I got accepted. I basically just stalked this glass professor until I think he was like scared of me. And so in the spring, I found out I was going to go there in the fall. And so anyway, I ended up showing up in the spring and saying, hey, next fall I'm coming. And he's like, yeah, talk to me in the fall. And so I like throughout the summer, I called him at his house, and he stopped answering and stuff. And so finally he answered again, and I said, well, can I just show up? And he's like, yeah, but you're not in the class. And so I showed up the first day of the class. And I had this is like pre internet really like being effective for scheduling stuff.
But being a stalker is still a real thing at this time, right?
That is still very, very effective. Being persistent, Mark.
Oh, yeah.
And so anyway, I showed up the first day of the class with my like purple ad card that they can sign, or whatever. And he basically just wanted to make eye contact with me. And he went around the room, and everybody had to say who they were and why they wanted to be in the class, and what they were excited about, whatever. And he didn't call on me, and then everybody's kind of staring at me. And so I'll never forget for the rest of my life. He looks at me and he just sighs, and he like looks down and just puts his hand out like, go ahead, because we both knew that was the moment I was in the class. And so that was really the start.
That is an amazing story.
Yeah, and we still stay in contact to this day, and And so anyway, I was pretty obsessed, and so he invited me back, and then I really got moving, a lot of momentum, and kind of the 10,000 hours thing. Well, I burned through that pretty quick, and got pretty proficient at it. And the university program here that I went to in River Falls, it didn't have a lot of artists coming through it, just because we're not necessarily on a main circuit for glass making. And so I went and took a workshop from an artist who was Australian. And Australia has a really amazing glass school called the Canberra School of Art. And so anyway, it was in Pittsburgh, and he said, I'm 18. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, I really love doing glass. And he said, well, you should move to Australia. And I was like, that's crazy. I'm not doing that.
How old are you at this time?
18. And so 6 months later, I got a one-way ticket, and I'm moving to Australia. I applied to the school, got in, and I was like, all right, I'm doing it.
Wow.
And so I lived there from the time, I think I moved there when I was 19, and then moved back here when I was 22. So I lived there about 4 years.
And just being in Australia, was that kind of the epicenter of glass like movement at that time? I mean, I feel like glass blowing is a very old art. Like, why Canberra, Australia?
Well, in the United States, Seattle's the epicenter. There's a guy named Chihuly, some of you may have heard of, right? And so he actually started his schooling and training in Madison, Wisconsin was the first program. The United States. So it's actually rooted in the Midwest. And then he went to Rhode Island School of Design, helped initiate that program. And then he's from Seattle, moved back there. And then he developed kind of this whole ecosystem there. There's a glass school there called Pilchuck, which is more like an intensive workshop type school. It's not like a 4-year degree program. But anyway, all this glass got established there. Canberra was kind of this, outlet like halfway across the world. And when they established the school in the 70s, they took an approach that's very traditional to like a Bauhaus model, which is a really important school in Germany with the modernist movement, with architecture, design, art. A lot of that stuff was born out of that. So a lot of the aesthetics we see today was really born out of the Bauhaus movement. And so what they do is they find leaders in each domain from all over the world, and they recruit them to come to one place. And they set up the school in the way that they want, their workshop in the way they want. So the guy who started the glass workshop, Klaus Moyer, he was a German and phenomenal artist, wasn't a glass blower, but he did kiln forming. And so he invented a whole bunch of techniques with glass, and he was like more like a painter almost. And he was still there when I was there. He wasn't teaching anymore, but I worked on his team and would help make work. And he'd work with these amazing artists in their visiting artist program. We had like Lino Taglia Pietro, who's known as the best glassblower in the world. He's from Italy, 10 generations back, glassblower. He came and did a workshop with us, So I was like, got to work on teams like that. And so it was like every 2 months you had a glassblower from Mexico, from Japan, from Argentina, like all coming through and bringing like wildly different tactics, techniques, expressive kind of attributes to the process.
I wasn't familiar with that process, that Bauhaus movement of the school of thought. How come do you think, and we won't focus that much on it, but why hasn't that taken off in the US, or has it in just smaller? I mean, I've never even heard the term before, but it seems like a phenomenal way to advance an art form, or really anything.
There are some examples, like Cranbrook School of Art has more of that type of education model, but the challenge with it is that if you're not really obsessive and really know what you want to do, it doesn't. The trade-offs are that you're headed down a very a very clear path, right? And so I think our education, America in a lot of ways is a very innovative country, right? Like we like to experiment, and maybe there's less structure in that, so we want to explore like a wide variety of things. So I think it's more cultural than anything else, and there's trade-offs to both. I mean, there's still really amazing education here, but for me, I think really loving craft. I wanted something that was highly structured, that was like, I want to be the best, right? Like, and that's kind of like the message my parents gave me. It was like, not in a negative pressure way, but kind of like, if you're going to do this is really hard. So like, you better get really good at it, right? Like, and you better be really committed. So they're kind of like, go wherever the best are, figure out where the best are and go work with them. That was their message.
Is there a natural talent element? I mean, I understand the 10,000 hour rule that essentially you become a master of something, but like, when did you realize that A, glass was your art form, and B, that you had some significant talent that you wanted to, keep developing? Was that back in Wisconsin before you even got to Australia?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was really fortunate that I had some natural affinity for the material, and, I think other people recognize that more maybe than I did. And I don't mean to sound like arrogant in that, but it was like I was so obsessed at getting better that I didn't even think about like, oh, I'm really good at this. I just thought like, I need to get better. I want to get better at it, right? It was like just this like, it was such a high level of focus about like, how can I constantly learn more? I was so curious about it. With that, I was aware that like, it was like after like 3 months, like, wow, I can make like pretty nice things, and that's actually really hard. And I did a lot of teaching after I graduated. And it's kind of like a professional athlete, where there's like certain affinities. However, like you can take somebody with a really good attitude and sort of like an average skill level and make them really good. It just might take them a little bit longer, and they're gonna have to work a lot harder. And then you can also have people that are really good that like don't want to try that hard, that like you maybe don't want on your team though. So like it's one thing to be really good, it's another thing to be really good part of something, right? And so that's kind of an important distinction.
So let's fast forward a little bit into the business, or we'll spend the entire time in Australia. On a side note, I actually went to school in Wollongong, Australia for a semester. So I'd mentioned that
that's not far from Canberra.
That's not far from
actually.
Canberra. I played water polo, and one of the meets we had was in Canberra.
Nice.
So what years were you there?
I was there 2005 to 2008.
Okay, I was there in 01. So.
And the joke in Australia is the best thing about Canberra is leaving. Because like you tell people here, I was like, oh, where in Australia? And you don't say Sydney or Melbourne, and they're like, and you say Canberra, and they're like, where?
Well, and it's not on the coast.
No, it's not on the coast.
So,
it's a little bit sleepy. I guess it's improved a lot, but I haven't been there back for several years.
So you come back to the U.S. and walk us through meeting your co-founder Joe, and like when you come back, like when did you start a company? Like what were you doing once you moved back here to the U.S.?
So when I moved back here, it was 2008, summer of 2008. And so like I didn't know anything really like about like, how the economy really functioned. I mean, I kind of generally understood, but so it was like global meltdown, right?
Yeah, great years to start a business, by the way.
So, and I have an art degree. So I was like, all right, this is really good timing. And so the University of River Falls, the professor that I had started with, he was on his kind of way out to retirement. So I stepped in part-time and kind of helped, support the program and as an interim professor, visiting professor. And so what was cool is there was all these students that were really talented and really energized, but they just hadn't had a lot of exposure. And I come in and I'm like, wild and just like, like have all these stories and all these cool things I've learned. And so I had a lot of fun working with them. And, I've always had to figure out how to sell, right? Like, and that's a huge part of, it doesn't matter who you are, like we all got to sell something. And so, and you can sell the dream, you can sell the drinking glass, you can sell whatever you want, right? And so from the time I graduated, I moved back here, and the honest truth is I moved in my parents' basement for like 8 months and like ground it out, was like, how can I sell something in glass in 2008? And so like I started like looking around going like, how are other people selling stuff? And so art fairs was the first thing. So like River Falls is this tiny art fair, and I like bought a booth and like started selling stuff there, and then like started like doing them all over the country. And so one of my students, Joe, who's now my business partner, he was a ceramicist, and so the ceramic studio and the glass studio are next to each other, and so he'd always be like kind of like peeking in the door. And how I describe in a university environment ceramics and glass, ceramics is like classical music, right? It's just like everything is like good in there, like they're like zenned out, right? And the glass studio, and in the case of River Falls, they like share a wall in the doorway. It is like punk rock on volume 12. It's like, what can we break all the time? And so Joe was really drawn to that. Like he's into like motorcycles, and he's got like kind of a fun energy. And so anyway, he's like over there in his classical music zone, and he's hearing us. And finally I just said like, why don't you like get over and take the class and like start, come over to the dark side, right? And so we hit it off right away, and I said, I'll work with you as an apprentice and, basically teach you everything I know, and hopefully you exceed me, right? And like within a couple of years, it's like better than I am. It's awesome.
When that was mainly just a natural chemistry you had, or just like why that instant click? Was it just a personality thing, or why Joe?
Well, I think a couple things. One, Joe is like the most genuine human you'll ever meet in your life, and so he's really fun, easy to get along with. Two, it's just drive. Like you can tell when people are really driven, right? Like we all know that in our personal lives, professional lives, and you sense that energy. You're like, oh man, this person, I like their energy, right? And we can't always point exactly what our finger is on it, and that word drive can mean a lot of different things, but you can tell that they're trying to accomplish something, or they have a high level of engagement, right? And so it's like this person's super engaged, and they're kind of like willing to do whatever it takes, and that's kind of the attitude you have to have if you want to be an artist or, it turns out, an entrepreneur.
This episode is brought to you by Adaptive. Adaptive is a technology company that basically processes all your invoicing. It communicates with QuickBooks, it communicates with Buildertrend. It basically takes everything that you have, puts it into their system, cost codes it, you vet it, you send it around the office. You can avoid those days of having 18 people stamp their approval on a piece of paper before a subcontractor gets paid. Go give them a look, give them a like, give them a follow, adaptive.build. This episode is brought to you by Menomin Reson Timbers. Find them at mrtimbers.com. Sarah Launderville and her team over in Hugo, Minnesota do an amazing job getting you the barnwood that you need for your projects. Whether you're an architect, a designer, a builder, whether you're doing residential or commercial, I highly recommend Sarah and her team. I've worked with her for over a decade. Their commitment to excellence, on-time delivery, and just their American-made, can-do attitude is really inspiring. They have a small team of 20 employees, and whether they're doing stuff in New York for Ralph Lauren or whether they're doing your local bar in Wisconsin, Sarah and her team are just amazing people. The only thing better is their product. So if you're looking for barnwood, please visit them at mrtimbers.com.
Before we talk about how you joined, just because I read it last night actually, and it was just such a funny story. Can you share the story of down in Des Moines of you trying to sell, and then also Joe's tent fiasco? Just I think everyone sees this incredible space that we're in, and it would be easy to think that, wow, this is just amazing you got here, but like you were living in your parents' basement like a lot of entrepreneurs. It's like a classic example, but walk us through a couple of those failures or those real waking moments where you're like, wow, this is not going how I thought it would go.
Yeah, I mean, we have like the this isn't the path kind of moment. That's our like optimistic way of framing it, right? There's some other choice words you could use in that moment. But it turns out selling glass out of like a little tiny tent in the summer in the Midwest is bad. That's a bad, it's not the path, right? And so my two favorite memories are, one was in Des Moines. I wasn't actually there because we did separate shows after like the first year. It was like, divide and conquer. We can do this. We can both be doing it, right? And so he calls me like the night before the show, like middle of the night, and he's like, yeah, like this like tornado basically came through and leveled like everything, right? And I'm like, well, what do we do? He's like, well, I don't know. I think there's like a half dozen like pieces left. I'll like in the morning like figure out what I can salvage and spend the next 2 days kind of like, trying to, and the tent is like, it's basically just like complete shambles. And he's like texting me pictures and stuff. But what was cool is like the art fair did a really nice thing. They like did a fundraising thing, and I think they got a couple grand to like all the artists, and then there was like some insurance thing. So anyway, like we kind of figured it out, but it was like, it was kind of like a sign, right? And you ignore the signs enough and the signs get bigger,
Till it blows away your tent. Well, he said, I think he was selling a $4,500 vase and no one wanted anything. And on top of it all, the tent was like wrapped around a telephone pole, like all the way down the block.
Yeah, when you talk about presentation, that's not the best presentation. The other one we had that was the sign kept getting bigger saying like this isn't the path was we went to Denver art fair called Cherry Creek, and it flash flooded and the tents are like floating down the street, and like the garbage cans that don't have enough weight are like becoming like these dams, and him and I are like literally out there like up to like our chest, and like all of our stuff's relatively safe because we kind of pushed it back, but we're like grabbing paintings off these tents for people and just trying to get it to like high ground, and it's like we're way too vulnerable here. Like we got to figure out a different recipe. So we knew that wasn't the long-term path, but you essentially you do whatever you have to do, and you kind of keep doing it until you can figure out what the next thing is. Even if you know for a while, your intuition is telling you like this isn't going to be the end thing. Like you embrace that journey, right? It's like really important.
One thing I've noticed, I've been to a few art fairs, and just in general, I love art mainly because I'm not good at it, but I do appreciate it. I feel like there's a very strong community among all artists, whether it's art, music. Is that true?
Yeah, I think there's like circles, right? So like when we're doing that, like you meet like this kind of nomadic circle of artists, right? And you show up at the same fairs, and you kind of get the people that like have your maybe level of aesthetic or whatever, and you can get drinks together and commiserate about your tent floating down the street or whatever, right? And so yeah, you kind of develop these little communities, and I think depending on, there's all different types of art, and so I think there's different circles that develop communities, just like in building trades or architecture or banking or whatever. So I think it's really about like shared experiences more than anything, right? And so as you have similar type of experiences, you feel a connection because you can relate, and it helps you process that.
Yeah, I mean, just for me personally, like even the Curious Builder podcast, me starting it was all based on community. And most of the people in this room I know personally, and I appreciate you coming out here, mainly because you had no idea what the show was going to be, but you did it because I asked you, which I appreciate. And but I've been so awakened in the last year or two of just community and how powerful it is. I think Minnesota is pretty special, and I want to give voice to our incredible artists, but I just think any community, when they kind of band together, I mean, you can just move mountains. And I love this idea that you have this nomadic tribe of, I assume you probably see people at multiple art fairs.
Oh yeah, I see the same people.
Same people. Do you find that any of those connections now, today, where you are? Because how many years ago has it been since you've done
that
those
was
art?
probably about, I think the last one we did was probably 11, 12 years ago at least.
Do you feel like, is there any connections now, or how often do people reach out and be like, hey, you traded your tent for a building, way to go? Like, has any of those connections come through, or that was just kind of a different phase of life?
Not really. I think it's like, I try to evaluate kind of life in chapters, right? Not that there's like a definitive stop and start, but kind of like, okay, that's a chapter in that chapter. Sometimes there's like a closing the book, like that's the last art fair I'm ever doing in my life. That's a good chapter to end, Like I drove back from Telluride, Colorado going, this chapter is done. Like, this is it.
I read you got a $25 paperweight.
I got
sold.
one paperweight sold,
yeah. And you spent, what, $2,000 on gas and whatever, but you got $25.
So in business terms, that's not good, right? Important lesson though, important.
So, okay, so we've got those failure stories out of the way, which I do enjoy. I could go those all night. But so you 2 years working on this. When did you and Joe know that you wanted to start the company Hennepin Made? Where did the name come from? And essentially walk us through kind of its maturation to where it is right now.
Yeah, so during that time when we were doing the art fair stuff, we were renting from a nonprofit in town called Full Sight Glass, which is an amazing organization. They're now in Seward. And these artist nonprofits, and they're in all different materials or mediums in the city and a lot of cities. They're really, really important. Incredible pieces of infrastructure for artists to have access and learn and get stuff started, whether you're a hobbyist or enthusiast or you want to start a business. And so we started by renting, and I'd built a couple studios. I was part of a very large nonprofit that established about a $15 million nonprofit in Australia, Glass Center, tourist attraction, a really big deal. I didn't know what was happening until I got there and just fortuitous timing. So I'd been part of that experience, and I built a small studio in River Falls for a friend of mine. And so Joe really wanted to build a studio because he hadn't done it before, and he had that naiveness, which was good and bad, And I had done it a couple times. And when you build a studio, it's like, okay, now I have this like thing that I have to take care of and pay for. But we actually had grown enough that we had enough people that wanted to buy glass that with the nonprofit, we were kind of using up most of the resources there. So they're kind of the community was kind of getting frustrated with us. And we understood that's not really the purpose, is like, it's there to support you. And then at a certain point you need to move on.
What kind of things were you selling? Like you branched out into light fixtures.
Yeah, so the kind of connection to lighting. So we evolved from like drinkware and decorative pieces and accessories, and then we got some commissions from designers and architects to make all kinds of different things, like everything from repairs to sinks to lighting. And so when I did a lighting commission, I was like, okay, this is definitely where we want to go. This is super fun to work on. And designers speak our language, they get us, and so I'm like, this is my new community. Like, we're gonna go make friends with all these people. And so running a glass studio is very, very expensive. It's very heavy equipment. Energy is running 24/7. And so I was like, all right, Joe, you wanna build a studio, I'll do that. But in your mind, we're building a factory. That's the model. Because either you have to scale it, or like you're doing it out of your garage with like a tiny furnace and like you keep super low overhead. And I wasn't super interested in doing that. So I was like, all right, the model is here. We're building a factory to support a community of people that can create at a really high level. And he's like, on board. And so I was like, okay, if we're gonna do that, then we have to go get a customer that can pay us every month, right? And so I said, okay, I'll work with you on building the studio, and I'm gonna go get room and board in the first year that we're in business. And he's like, all right. And I was like, you gotta be ready to produce. And he's still in school, he hasn't graduated. I'm done teaching at this point. And so anyway, all that happened. We built the studio, like super scrappy, bought stuff off eBay, Craigslist. I got the furnace in Southern Illinois, like drove overnight. Like, it's just like your quintessential like startup story. Yet I like know nothing about business. Like, I haven't read case studies. Like, I haven't done like I don't know any of this stuff. I'm just like, this is what we got to do next. Like, it's just all like intuitive, like survival mode.
I like your idea of selling it before you have it, because I think that's a classic entrepreneurial way of launching a business. But you must have had some skin in the game, or money. What kind of money did you have to put into the business? Did you have to take loans at that point to buy this kind of equipment, or how did you navigate that?
Yeah, so at that point in my life, I was very scared of debt. And just like, I feel like my parents did a really good job of making me try to be financially responsible. So I was just like super fearful of debt. And I didn't really understand like credit. I didn't understand any of that. And so I graduated college. I was working in Australia. I worked a lot as like a hired glassblower, and I made really good money actually, working for contemporary artists, for designers, for all kinds of people. And so I was able to save about $3,500 when I moved back here. And so my parents let me live in their basement for free. I had $3,500. I'm like, okay, if I do art fairs, I need to turn that into, you know, more money to be able to continue to do this. So I had about 60 grand is the amount that I built the whole first studio with no financing, no loans, nothing. I had a credit card that I maxed out a few times, but I knew that the sales were coming in. It was kind of month to month. But that was essentially it. And I was really against having investment because I was just really worried about controlling everything, and I didn't really know what our model was going to be. And so 60 grand is not enough to build a glass studio. So I was basically get the thing hot, turned on, and start selling, or you've already sold it, right? I knew though when we went to Room and Board, so Bell Manufacturing is based here. They make steel furniture, and so we got a tour. We got an introduction to the owner of Bell, and we got a tour and stuff. And so I was kind of talking to him about this, and so I kind of had a little bit of sense, and they're very different than us in a lot of ways, but they're similar in some. So I kind of had a sense of what we needed to do. And I knew if I went and presented to Room and Board, I knew the first thing they would ask me is can you scale and can you deliver on time? I knew those were the questions. Nothing else matters if you say no to either one of those questions. So we had to build the studio before we could actually sell to them. So there was some risk there. And I knew there'd be about 8 months was my guess. That I'm I don't know how we come up with $5,000 a month to pay for this thing. So we threw keg parties, to be honest, and I'm not joking. I mean, they weren't your college, they were sophisticated, like this, saxophone player, and I'm not joking. They were really nice, and my parents' friends and stuff, they got money, so we'll invite them, and they'll buy vases and stuff. I'm serious. It's a community, right? Because everybody wants to support, right? And it's my 24-year-old friend, they can't buy any, it's so we just had to figure out okay, they can buy they can pay $10 for beer. They'll do that. They'll buy gifts for for whatever. They'll buy drinking glasses for their house, and next thing you know, you got $2,500. Rent is paid, utilities are paid, and now we can go one more month forward.
How did you know that Room and Board was your first target?
Well, we didn't really know enough about lighting to get into the architecture field, and I knew developing product was really expensive. And for those of you that are involved in product companies that work on this stuff, it's you know what I'm talking about. It's super long lead times to get from the inception to the time somebody actually buys the first thing, and then all the marketing and stuff behind it. And so I had become friends with a few different people that were in kind of product companies, from makers that are already sort of established studio models to a company like Lowell, if you know them. So I kind of at an event met the founder and one of the other key people there. And so I just asked them a lot of questions who do you sell to? And they were kind of well, there's all these designers, and that's a really good model, but you need the consistency when you're starting. And so I got some kind of pointers, consistency is really important. And so I had never heard of Room and Board before actually. And so then I started researching them, and then I got connected to Bell Manufacturing, and he had said that they're actually looking for a glass vendor. So I had kind of okay, yeah, this all is adding up. And so that's kind of, Lowell had worked with them as well. So I had a couple different contacts that worked with them and had good things to say about them. And I was I need enough scale. We got to make 300-400 units a month that are already sold to get this thing stable, so that I can get my head above water and start to figure out what's next.
So that pitch meeting obviously was successful.
Yeah, I mean, we did it, we try to do stuff with a little bit of flair because we're artists. So, it's not a normal business meeting. Again, I have no context. I've never been in a business meeting in my life at this point. I'm 25, 26. I've never actually been in a formal business meeting. I've sold on the street, and I've taught. Those are my two things I've done. And so I'm all right, how do we make an impression? I was and I've always worked in restaurants on the side. So I've always had a night job throughout this whole period, in my teens and 20s. And so I love hospitality. I love restaurants are like theater. You just can make magical moments happen. And so I was well, we got to do a pop-up kitchen in the glass studio and throw a dinner party and build this whole experience, which you don't have to do that, right? That's so much work. But my mind was set on it. We did it, and they loved it. And then they came back 2 weeks later. So they were okay, well, if you want to come up with some designs, accessories and lighting, we'll come back in a couple weeks and review. And so we really hustled and put all this stuff together.
This is just you and Joe at this time, or is there any other people in your?
There's another guy, Kevin Landswork, who's really critical in the story of Hennepin Made, and he's been there since the beginning as well. And so it was the three of us. And so put together all these designs, and we're thinking if they take one light and like a vase and a bowl, like we're set, we've made it. Like we can pay rent, we don't have to do the party thing every month anymore. They got out of the dirty business, right? And so they came in and we had like a 2-hour meeting, and then they were like, okay, cool, we're gonna run all of it. And there was 19 designs.
Whoa.
And we were like, and they're like, you'll be able to produce that, right? And I'm like, yeah, we will. I have no idea. Like, I have no clue how we're gonna do this. Joe is still in school, so is Kevin, right? I have them 2 days a week. And so anyway, like, it's so funny too. And about 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, I get the PO, which is for the approval samples, which I think was like $2,500. And I was like, we made it. Like, I thought this was like the real order, And so, just like the scale, like, and understanding scale. And so we learned a lot. Like when we actually had to deliver, we learned a lot. And my thing was I was like, deliver on time. If we say we can do it, we got to figure out how to do it. I don't care if we're working like 7, and we did. We worked 7 days a week. We worked like crazy hours, and that's not sustainable. But you can sustain it for 6 months while you're figuring your stuff out because you're surviving.
And you quit your night serving job.
Yeah, I actually. So another key person in this story is my partner Rose, and so. We lived together at the time, and she worked in nonprofit, which doesn't pay well as for-profit, but she had at least a stable income. And so I was working like crazy hours, and she was kind of getting sick of that. And we've been together for like about 1.5 years, and she kind of said like, this doesn't work for me because I'm not in the hours, So she's like, quit your night job. I'll take care of like our living expenses for a while you get it moving, like get it going, right? And so that kind of really helped me then focus where I could have a little bit better balance. And you got to have somewhere where you can have a release, otherwise it's like it really starts to lose the fun. And so that was really critical. And so, those early years, and for a long, long time, it allowed me to take, a lot of risk. Because at the end of the day, like I still have a place to sleep. I still have like, if everything fails, like I can get my feet back under me. And so that was always kind of our balance, was like, she kind of the stable income, and I was able to be risky, right? And she believed in the vision. She was an Instagram manager. She's got like a serious job at a foundation. She's like in her break time, like running her Instagram, because you're scrappy. And this is 5 or 6 years ago, but she played a critical role in getting the company off the ground as well. There's like, I think in any business that's like a startup like that, there's always like these kind of invisible people in what you present. But they're hustling with the partner. They're like, like we had one example where our cord sets for our lights didn't come in, and so I had to buy like the parts, and we would throw parties at our house on Friday nights, and we would drink wine and have people assemble cord sets, and we feed them food, because it was like I got like 4 weeks to get all these done, and so I was like,
in building what you did with your friends, you'd move into a house, you would not pay the builder to paint your garage, you'd have all your family over, and you'd buy beer and pizza. You've taken this to a whole new level.
Yeah, we don't do it anymore now.
Yeah, we're out of it. That was well played, sir. Well played.
This episode is brought to you by Pella Windows and Doors. They've just been an amazing partner over my entire career. I've been building for 18 years, and I've pretty much built every single home with Pella being installed and in my homes. And whether you're doing a small remodel, whether you're doing commercial or high-end architecture, they have a product and a service that can fit any one of your needs. And on a personal level, Ed and Peter over in management have just been incredible mentors to me, both as a person and as a business owner. It's been a very special relationship, and their team, their general manager, their sales department, and their service. I mean, you call them, they're there. They back up what they say, and they're the only window company that has a lifetime warranty on their windows. So when it's time to do a remodel or build a new home, Pella is the brand that we trust and we support. Please reach out to them at pellanorthland.com or on their Instagram at Pella Northland. Give them a follow, give them a like. Be sure to follow what they're doing, and be sure to tell your Pella rep that you heard about them from the Curious Builder.
In the showroom that we're in, do you have any fixtures here that were part of the original room and board designs?
We have a similar collection right here above. This is our Halo. They sell something similar called Bandon that has a similar aesthetic. It's different, a little bit different shapes and colors and different hardware. But out of all the collections that we launched with them, majority of them they're still selling today. And one of the collections is the #1 seller for us that we launched in that first day. So it's pretty good.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a hard follow-up question after that one. That's pretty impressive. What? So, how many years ago was that original order?
So the company is about 11 years old. So around 2012 is when we got the first order. We first developed a partnership with them in 2011. It took about 6 months to get everything going.
And where was the studio? Because the first studio was not here, correct?
Correct. So we were on East Hennepin Avenue in Northeast. We love Northeast. And when we started the studio, it was like Joe and me. So it was like Joe would use his name and go sell stuff. I would use my name and go sell stuff. And so when we decided to build like an organization, it was like, all right, we need a name. All right, we got to have a name, right? And it's got to stick. And so we were like Hennepin, and I've always been really into like, place-based entrepreneurship, right? Because I'm like an artist and I care about like what I'm creating, where I'm creating it. And so I've always wanted to invest in the city, right? Like I made a decision to live in Minneapolis, to plant roots here, to stay here and invest. And so I really wanted our business to have some connection to the city. And so we started on Hennepin Avenue. I was like, let's call it Hennepin. That's awesome, because like if you have any connection to Minneapolis, you kind of like know like Hennepin. Oh yeah, Minneapolis, right? Or Minnesota. And so we threw our first studio sale with that name and like the credit card receipts, or whatever, when you checked your thing online, it said Hennepin. And we had to add the Made because people thought they got like a ticket from, like a parking ticket, right? So that was like a little bit of a brand fail. And we'd tell people like our company was Hennepin, and they'd be like, Hennepin what? So we were like, well, we're makers, so it was like Hennepin Made. That's what it is now. And so we had like about 6 months that we were just Hennepin, and then we added the Made, and then that's kind of how it stuck.
And so what year were you able to buy this property? You said it was a 2-year process. I guess what year was that you got into?
So 2016. And so I think one of the things that has enabled us to have success is that I'm always looking about 4 to 5 years ahead. And trying to figure out where are we going to be and what are the steps that I'm going to have to be paying attention to get us there. And so, by like 2013, we're 2 years in, and I'm like looking at buildings, and I'm meeting, bankers and kind of like trying to figure out what this whole world means. Because by the time I'm ready, I have to be educated, right? And so if I'm actually ready, I'm not going to have the time to educate myself to know like how to get the deal to come together, or how to get it all to come together.
Were you still doing pop-up dinners at every one of those marketing meetings with the
No,
bankers?
those are real business meetings at that point, right? So I understood now that,
I actually prefer that. I mean, anytime you want to have a business meeting and make dinner, I think that's a solid strategy, actually.
Mark, I also learned a term called efficiency in business that, I still struggle with to this day, but yeah, so. But when we started the process to buy a building, like I had to start to learn a lot more about financials and a lot more about how debt and credit and a bunch of things worked. And so that was a pretty big learning process. And I had a CPA firm come in, and the first question, they sit down, formal business meeting, right? I got my nice shirt on, and they asked me how big my line of credit is. That's the first question. And I don't know what a line of credit is. Like, that's a true story. And so I'm like laughing, because I know I have to tell them I don't know. And like when I don't know something, I'll just tell you I don't know. And they're like, well, why are you laughing? I'm like, I don't know what that is. And they're like, what? And they're like, well, how did you fund this? And I'm like, well, like we're scrappy. I don't know. I got credit cards. I pay those off every month. I max it out, and then I pay it off. And then if there's not enough credit, I'll get another credit card. And they're like, that all combined is like a line of credit, but we need to get that in the bank. I was like, cool. All right, that makes sense to me, So like a lot of it is just like, kind of learning as you go. And so I mapped out in the areas of the city that I really liked. Went on Hennepin County GIS, and you can figure out whoever the property are. A lot of times if they're an LLC, you still can trace it back. So I'm good at the stalking thing, right? And so if I'm going to find somebody, I will find you. And so I figure out who owned them, and then I call them and just start cold calling. And I like this Glenwood corridor, I like Seward, I like Northeast, and I really focused a lot on Northeast to start because that's kind of where our home was. And it was just, there was too much activity happening there. And then this Glenwood corridor I really liked because I felt like there was a lot of opportunity to help shape it, and I was really excited about being close to a farmer's market, and being downtown was really exciting for us, and then just the connection to glass and stuff. And so we actually had this under contract, and then it fell apart, and I was pursuing a different building, and then that got complicated with some pollution, that was found and stuff, and then this came back, and so it's kind of serendipitous. Like I was like getting a lot further in, and then all of a sudden it was like, okay, this is now a thing. And so,
how big was your team at this time? So there's 3 of you plus a few silent, let's say, supporters. But how big is your actual team now that you've got some of these orders? You've got a couple years under your belt.
Yeah, full company was 12 people at that point when I bought the building, and so we went from 5,000 square feet to acquiring a 30,000 square foot site, and. Yeah, I didn't want to do it twice. I think there's a right size for most businesses, right? and then if you want to jump to a different size, you have to evaluate, is it the same business, and can I keep the same values? And so I think the right size for our business is maybe 50, 60 people. And I think about it in terms of people, and then you can kind of do the revenue thing, because like for me, what I'm really building, like what the North Star is like community and creativity. Those are two things that are like the primary drivers for me. And so I think about the amount of people that I feel like we can take care of, and then how creative can we be? Can we be expressive with what we're doing? Can the business act as as an expressive work, right? And I think a lot of people in business think like that. They just don't understand those terms because they exist in a different context, right? Than like what my context has been.
I think you have a unique insight in the people I've talked to. I think your ability to look long term is very valuable and probably something all business owners, I can tell you as myself. I've got a business coach who's going to help me here do this over the next couple of months, but we spend a lot of time thinking the here and now, and I think what you've done has obviously paid extreme dividends. So I don't think it's that common. I think it's an incredible asset that you've been able to develop, and I love the fact that you've been able to empower your people, and I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's pretty special. How you mentioned when you moved originally it was 12 people. How many people do you currently employ now?
We're about 30 right now in the Hennepin Made business, and then our glasshouse team is 5 full-time, and then we have about 20 part-time because obviously when you have events you have like a large staff and stuff.
And how long into having this building before the glasshouse and the wedding venue kind of became another entity that kind of helped supported this whole space?
It was about 2 years, and so the first year was just getting Hennepin Made set up, and then from there we kind of like, all right, what are we going to do with this side? The original vision was to have like a small like coffee shop that was a showroom as well, and then that evolved because it was like, all right, now we have people that are interested in renting our space, and then we ended up kind of adding in a cafe component before the pandemic, which ended up becoming really successful. And then between the pandemic and construction stuff, it's like not the right model for us. But 2018, the Super Bowl, when Super Bowl was here, that was our first week. We opened for that. We had a private booking and stuff, so sort of the kickoff.
I mean, your space is amazing. I'd overheard earlier that I think you have 42 weddings this year alone, which is incredible. I assume there's a number of events in addition to that. In terms of overall revenue, how does the glass house compare to Hennepin Made in terms of a split?
So right now it's probably about a third glasshouse, and glasshouse is growing really fast. It'll grow probably close to 100% this year. And I think there's still quite a bit of room there. We probably could double it again.
Is it because there's that much room to move in the market, or because you're taking over that much market share?
It's more where I think we're taking over market share, and then we're sort of hitting our stride with gaining awareness and the right audience. And so we'll pursue pretty aggressive growth again next year, and then we'll sort of stabilize it because I think it'll be more or less the right size unless we figure out some other attributes to the model that work. So Glasshouse is a scalable organization for another couple of years, and then it's like for a small business like that, it's like get to the right size, pay your people really well, keep them, and build a great community around it. And that's kind of like my recipe for, I think, how to build a successful organization. And then Hennepin Made, you really think in terms of a factory. And it's vertically integrated, so you're building both a sales operation and a brand, and then you're building continual improvements around a factory. So that's a very scalable business. I mean, I think you could grow that business to between 50 and 100 million if you wanted to. That's not my dream. But we'll continue to scale it quite a bit over the next several years and be pretty assertive in acquiring market share. We have such small market penetration that like it's awesome. Like when I travel and go to markets, I do sales still, and I'm like, have you ever heard of us? No, right? It's like that's both the challenge and the opportunity, right? Because like 8 out of 10 doors I knock on, they've never heard of us, right? And these are all people when they hear of us, they're like, whoa, this is cool. This is exactly right? And so we know that there's a lot of opportunity out there.
When from business to business and business to consumer, what percentage is your split there? So like obviously I'm a builder, we've got architects and designers in the room, let's just say that they're all business, so we're buying from you and versus obviously selling off the street. What's your split between the two?
Well, Jen and Chris are here, our sales team, so they probably give you real numbers. But I would say that we're probably 95% B2B. 95% A and D. And that's really how our organization is tooled. That's how it's built. And we're happy. If you're a homeowner and you want to come to us, we're happy to like help you with lighting and sell you some lights. At the same point, you probably don't need lights every year, right? And so we would love to work with you as many times as we have the opportunity to. But if we're working, with JCath, it's like they have 10 projects this year, right? They don't need us on every single one, but they might need us on 3, right? And then we want to deliver like an incredible experience for them, and they know that that's what their client expectations are. And then when we deliver on our promise. I talk a lot in the organization about keeping our promise because like it's really important. And so when we deliver on that promise to the designer and the designer's client, then like we build that relationship and build that rapport with them. And so we want repeat business, right? Because not only is it like a smart way to run your business, it's just like way more fun because it's like, Mark, we're gonna do like homes forever,
It's true, it's true.
Right? And so then like each time, like we both learn and then we get more creative and like it also becomes way easier. And so then it's like really fun because as you become more successful, we become more successful and I get to enjoy seeing your success, right? And I like feel like I'm like on the journey with you. And so I think that's when like business is its most rewarding in a sense of a community.
I 100% agree. I mean, even from my own experience, and I assume this is similar to everyone that's done the tour before. So I came to do a tour. I can't remember how. I think Jen Johnson did a phenomenal job getting me in here because it's actually really difficult, between a young family and a business for me to actually go do tours. Plus my designers, frankly, pick out lighting and tile. So there's a number of, talented people in here that have, over the years, have been patient with me. Thank you. Mercedes, where are you? Somewhere. Oh, there she is, front row. Of course she is. Anyway, the point is it's sometimes hard for owners to get into these. And then once you're there, you're like, wow, this is amazing. I got to talk to all my designers. I got to get them all here. And then once I get really excited,
we know what that looks like.
Yeah, I apologize. You're all here because I got really excited by one tour. So yeah, it was dangerous. But so, I was so impressed with it. So we have our home we just finished our artist at home tour.
Yep.
And the designer had selected all the lights. They had ordered them all. And I called her and I said, can we unorder some of these lights or return them? And she's like, no. And I'm like, well, what if I really want them in my house? And she's like, the homeowner doesn't want them. I'm like, I want them. And she's like, well, are you willing to pay for them? And I'm like, well, let's see if I can get her on a tour first. So I brought her in. She loved them. And, I was pumping the forges of optimism. And yeah, that was a dad joke. Thank you. And yeah, it just happens. And so anyway, so she switched, and I tell you what, that was the most commented thing on our entire house. Now we have a beautiful home, I'm very proud of it, but the lights were just absolutely the star of the show. And now I can't wait to bring more people on because I keep telling people what I love about it's not a product, it's the craft. You talk so much about your people and the handcrafted, and now you're telling us kind of your thought process in supporting the community. It shows in the actual fixtures themselves. So many people would come through our homes and be like, they would touch it, they would feel the imperfections, and there is an organic sense of playfulness in it that attracts people to it, and it's a story. I love to sell, in case you didn't know. But
I did.
You give me a story, oh man, yeah. I'm doing a pretty good job not talking today.
You are.
Yeah. Can I get a round of applause for my wife? Thank you. That's for you, honey. You told me not to talk, and I made it 55 minutes without talking. So now it's my time. Step aside, sir. No, sir. So, but anyway, back to the artness. I can't wait I think anytime we get something that we're that passionate about, and sometimes it's people, and sometimes it's product, and that's what I love about building and collaborating with artists like yourself, because I feel like you're right. Like I love telling this story because I feel very passionate about it. So,
well, thanks. We appreciate that.
Yeah. We'll talk after the show.
Okay.
Going back to keeping your people happy, you had mentioned, pay them, encourage them. Tell the audience a little bit about, what you do to encourage just team growth. And everyone is so happy. I don't think you're paying them to be happy.
No.
There seems like there's a joy in their work. Every time I've done the tour now 3 or 4 times, and they just, I don't know, there's a sense of just joy, a little pep in their step. Can you talk a little bit how that's
I think
possible?
I'll provide a little bit of context and be pretty transparent about it. I think one, in an organization like ours, if money is your primary motivator, we can't compete. Like it's just, we're not gonna be able to compete. And so what we look at is like, okay, how do we create the right environment that attracts the right type of people? There still needs to be that upside over time, and like we all want our lives to move forward, so we really map out like, okay, how do we get that path rolling? And sometimes we can't control the timing of that, and we're pretty transparent about that. Like, you know, as the company grows, then we can continue to, you know, improve people's, you know, sort of financial incomes off of it. So we tend to hire a lot of people that are, you know, really passionate about art or design because they love what they do. The other thing is like culture isn't like a static thing. And so, you know, and I think if you interviewed any employee that's been here for, you know, a while, they would, and they were being honest, they wouldn't say like, oh yeah, it's always been great. It wasn't like, oh yeah, those were the dark years or something, right? But I think like in anything, right? Like if you just pretend that things are always good and like stuff's always flowing like in a really positive way, then you're lying. And the last thing people want when they're like looking for a leader is one that won't tell the truth, you know, like they want you to just be transparent and honest. So like I've had one-on-one conversations where I'm like, yeah, like stuff isn't really that good right now, or we have these issues where like the mood and the energy and it's off, and we address that and we work through that. And it also doesn't change on a dime. Like you really need to figure out like what's causing the challenges, where the tension's happening, or, you know, we're pretty disciplined now if the people are the right people. So if we have somebody that's like really not the right person, our approach is we give them the opportunity to change, right? Like they got to be coachable to like what the organization needs and what the teammates need. And then if they don't evolve, then that's when they made the decision that they don't fit. And so, you know, when we've had to grow the organization dramatically or pivot it, we go through a process where I present what that looks like. I have meetings with pretty much everybody in the company, and then I let them know, that my expectation is that they get on board. And it's not even my expectation. Hennepin Made's expectation is that they get on board. And when they aren't, then I try to go through a process to work with them on that. And then a lot of times people self-select, that's what I call it. So essentially they say like, this isn't for me, right? And they end up becoming like way happier, like in whatever they do. You know, a lot of them I'll keep in touch with, and it's like, you know, 6 months later, they're like, I'm like the happiest I've ever been. I became a photographer, and I'm like, that's awesome, you know, like that's your calling, right? And then I think the other thing is like, as far as like really making sure everybody feels like they're part of building something, right? And so we really share that energy, and we have call outs like every other week we do an all hands meeting. Like every time there's like a call out like so-and-so, they did this, it was awesome and it really worked, right? Or we highlight how people collaborate across something to keep the promise to the customer or like make an experience better. We also provide like, you know, transparent financial management. So that doesn't mean full open book, but I show a lot of numbers. Like you can see like more or less top to bottom, everything that's happening with the business. So like when you think like, you know, I'm like, you know, buying my yacht in the Riviera or whatever, like, you know, the numbers you see tell you that that's not actually what's happening. What's actually happening is like, we're doing okay, we're taking a ton of risk, we're reinvesting super heavily, and like I'm gritting my teeth a little bit, but I feel confident we're gonna make it, right? So like, then now the story like all lines up, and then you have a really firm understanding when you're walking in these doors every day, where you're gonna contribute and what your team is relying on you to do for your contribution for the organization. So we talk in terms about like, what are you contributing to the organization, what's your role, and how are you helping build what we're creating together. And so language is really important, making sure people are bought in. Another thing, like, you know, it's typically a lot of small things. I created a fun committee because I was like a little bit fatigued of like throwing all the parties at this point, you know, like 12 years in. And I just felt like I wasn't doing a good enough job. And so Chris is on the fun committee, she's a rock star. So anyway, I talked to one of my other colleagues who's on the leadership team. I said, I think we need to create a fun committee. This is a little seed we need to plant. Let's see if it takes off. And it totally took off. And they do the coolest stuff, like way cooler than I could ever imagine. And they have the energy for it, where I was just like, I don't have the time or energy for this. And I'm getting resentful because I'm like, I'm burnt out. I've got a million things. I'm trying to make sure everything works. And then I'm like, you know, you like plant the seed, you give people enough room to express themselves through it, and they like do a way better job than you could ever do. So that's like the secret sauce is like, you know, figure out what people are passionate about and like give them enough room and like get out of their way and like tell them where the barriers are. And then just like your job is to go work and remove the barriers. And so you start operating in that mode and you like really are honest. Like I've had some really tough conversations with a lot of people in this company, and I'm not scared to do it. And like, I'm also actively asking them to be honest with me and let them know, like, you know, if you do it in a way that's kind, it can be like, you know, pretty much a punch in the face. But if you do it that it's like kind, and you're doing it in a way that you're not trying to like hurt my feelings, like I'll receive it. I'm not going to say anything in the moment because I got to reflect on it, but I'll actually like receive it and try to improve. And I'll like reflect, and usually I'll come back to that person and say, hey, you know what? I reflect on that, and here's what I thought, right? And I'll usually have something I'm like, you know what, this part I think is right. I'm gonna actually work on that. And so like, if you're not doing the work as a leader yourself, like, you know, it's hard to get people to really buy in. So I think it's a lot of small things, and it hasn't always been pretty. I mean, there's been a lot of learnings, a lot of kind of resets, a lot of like trial and error. And, you know, we're all about like just continuously improving the journey, you know.
Wow, that's very impressive. One of my questions is, you obviously were a very talented glassblower. You traveled, you came back, you teach, you started. You're now the salesperson that also cooks a little bit, but you stopped the cooking. I think you need to bring that back and have a personal chef at your pitches because it'd go over well. My question is now, what does your day look like? Are you still blowing glass? Are you more, I mean, you really dove deep into, essentially you were the COO and you were the accountant. I mean, you learned all of those things. Now, what is your place in the company?
Yeah, so I think like when you're building an organization, or if you lead an organization, it's really important to have at least be knowledgeable enough in each area so that you can kind of help make informed decisions and then listening to your people. So like, you know, I could probably get a B on like a test in most of the areas. You know, I'm not an expert, but I could like pass. And so that helps me interpret and then be able to connect all the dots and be able to anticipate well. So I stopped blowing glass as my like professional role back in like 2015, which was actually really hard for me because my identity was a glass blower at the time, and it's a portion of my identity, but now I'm like older and maybe a little wiser, so like I understand it can be a complex identity, right? But it was really hard because like from the time I'm 18, I'm like, I'm a glass blower, that's my meaning in life, like, you know, and so I had to like go through a process of like, what does that mean, and will I be happy? And really like what I felt like at the time was that it was my responsibility to put the community first, and to do so I have to do whatever is needed to be able to get us to the next spot, to continue to create opportunity or provide stability for people. And so that means I had to stop blowing glass because there's people that can do that job, and I got to move on, which was probably the hardest thing in the entire history of the company for me. And so there was a period of about 4 years where I don't think I blew a single piece of glass, which was really, really hard. And so in the last year, I've started blowing glass like on weekends in the winter months, too hot in the summer. And the glass blowers all make fun of me because like I'm like so soft now, and like, you know, like it's like really hot and stuff. But so I started blowing glass this winter. And try to commit to doing it once a week, and I'm making artwork, and so I'm less worried about like, how do I sell this, but more like, all right, I need an outlet, and it actually helps me a lot with a lot of other things in the business because of the meditative process, and a lot of stuff kind of, I don't know how to describe it, unlocks itself. You guys probably all have activities where it's like I forget about everything and I just am so immersed in this, and all of a sudden like I come back to my other stuff and it's like all of a sudden I can think about it and solve it or whatever. And so I do that on the side now. I don't think I'll ever be allowed back in on a production team. They are like so good. They do it just like because they're nice people, but I don't think they'd ever like, you know, I don't think I can really cut it. And there's tons of people that, you know, can do that, right? Or want that opportunity, are really driven and really skilled. And so now my role is sort of business development. I really excel in the business development space, I feel like. Because I'm always like thinking about the future. And then product, my business partner Joe runs the product team. So I lead kind of the creative direction and vision of that. And I like that because it's like the artistry and imagining and then working through the processes. And I have a unique, set of knowledge because I've spent, you know, 10 years really working very closely with architects and designers, so I can anticipate and interpret what they want, or thinking about the level of quality. So like, you know, just little tiny details. And then I also like, you know, really spent a lot of time trying to master the process of glass blowing. And so I really understand the techniques. And so like I imagine how we would make it as I'm like drawing it, right? And so I'll create sketches, and then we have designers that turn those into 3D, and then they actually like engineer how it's gonna come together.
How often? So let's say Matt from Plaid comes to you, local architect here, great shout out for him, he does great work. He comes to you and says, hey, I want you to do this unique piece. How often are you getting bespoke pieces like that? You said 95% of your work is going to businesses like designers, architects. How often does that happen?
We say one of our mottos last year is finding our no's faster. And so sometimes a no is a good thing. And so we actually say no to almost all bespoke now. We still do some projects, but they have to be, there has to be enough budget so that we get paid for the design. Because like no client is going to walk in and we go, oh, it's a $15,000 design fee, and that doesn't actually get you anything. Like that's just not going to work, right? And so the overall project budget has to be big enough that the design fee is built in. And so we're very specific, and then it really needs to match kind of like what our core processes are, but it ends up, you kind of have to pick how you build your business, right? And so you can pick to be like a custom like lighting shop or studio and do really well. You can build a really nice business off of that. It's really hard if you're building the level of manufacturing investment that we have. So we have to really focus on designing around our core manufacturing. With that, we're trying to continually design more and more towards like modifiable product or adaptable product. So if Matt comes in and is like, hey, I really like this chandelier, but I want 6 arms instead of 4. I want them 4 inches shorter, and I want it this other finish. I'm like, that we can do, right? But if Matt comes to me and is like, hey, I got this crazy idea, I'm like, oh, we still might do it, right? And it all depends. It might be like this really prominent hotel he's designing in Bozeman, Montana that's gonna like be a major deal, right? And I might be like, oh yeah, we're totally in. And that's a real project, right? No, I'm just kidding.
That's only, let's be honest, that's only so you can go fly fishing.
That too, yeah. Or if we can roll in like new product development into it, we'll do bespoke as well. So like if it's like we can then evolve that into like a product. And we're really transparent about that. We're like, hey, we'll take this on. Also, you may not see this exact install, but you're gonna see a collection come out of it maybe down the road.
And just because we could talk for hours, I just had something I wanted to bring up here real quick. Basically it was 2020. I just want to tell everyone in the audience, if they haven't read some of your history, just some of the things that your building is capable of. So in 2020, you went to 100% biodegradable packaging. You've got 100% LED lighting, 100% edible packing peanuts. I'm not sure why anyone.
My dogs will eat those. I don't know if you all should, but I'm in a cornstarch.
60% of the power of the studio comes from solar. 100% of the scrap glass is recycled. You've introduced wildflowers on the rooftop for honeybees in 2022. You have a rooftop water capture in 23, and you've got a greenhouse heated by a waste system, or waste heat is basically heating it.
Greenhouse isn't there yet, but I'm always thinking about the future. We're gonna get that one.
So we've hit, these are pretty amazing. So just briefly, because we're running out of time, tell us a little bit about your commitment to, is this just your longevity of giving back to the city, it's touching on your core principles? Because these are pretty, I think a lot of people talk about being green or doing things for the environment, but like that's like 9 or 10 things that are like seriously actionable, and not only a great story, but obviously you found a way to make it work with your business.
Yeah, I think, so we're all aware we're gonna have to dramatically change a lot of things, like very soon, for us to be able to sustain the level of, kind of life we need on the planet. And so I've researched and studied, I'm an amateur kind of like both like urbanist and kind of like, naturalist, right? And so those are things that are just really strong passions of mine. And so then again, when I said earlier, like how can the business be an expression? I'm really only interested in like driving the business if it does the 2 things, if it takes care of the people and it's creative. And the creative is an expression. It has to be an expression. So it has to be an expression of like what I feel like is important, and the people that we, have show up here every day feel like is important. If you asked every one of our employees, as in most organizations, if sustainability or like living a healthy life on this planet is important, like everybody like, yeah, right? And so I'm always like, okay, it's gonna take me like several years to be able to get there, but I constantly have to be showing them that like I'm making decisions to try to do it. I'm trying to demonstrate the model that's possible. And so like it took me about 5 years to get the solar thing figured out, and like the payback on it, when I finally got it all figured out through multiple programs and a bunch of things, and like, like the scrappy like solar, he's got a great business, but he's like me, he's like total DIYer. So like I got him way down in price, and like we did a little of the install, like just kind of like worked all the angles. The net break even was 3 years, right? And so here's some real business numbers. Net break even, right? It's a $650,000 system. At 3 years, I'm like break even, assuming a 4% increase in electrical costs per year, which it will be higher than that. So that's a very conservative estimate. My payback over 20 years is $2.5 million on that system, because we have super high peak demand charges because we are cranking an electrical furnace all the time. So when there's peak demand, we're like at the top, like absolute worst, you know? And so I get like double the electrical fees back because I take my load, that percentage of my load out. So nerding out about solar. But I told people like in our company, like, you know, when we started, I was like, we're gonna have an electric furnace that is run predominantly by solar, and we're gonna do it, right? And so if I'm gonna put that out there and actually verbalize it more than once, we're gonna do it. And so, you know, it's constantly figuring out like, how do you set the standards? And one thing I would say too, like in my sort of awareness is like living in Australia, they're way more on the fringe, right? Like their ecosystem is way more fragile than ours. Water resources, heat, like, I mean, wildfires we saw several years ago. And so when I got there, I was like, my awareness level went like probably 10x of what it was in the United States. Because like the United States is a land of abundance. It's like crazy how abundant it is here, right? And so like water conservation in Australia is like insane, and just everything, conservation of everything, because it's like, it's just, everything's a lot more fragile there. So I think that was like super ingrained in my mind. And then if we're gonna use a lot of resources, we better be making stuff that in theory can last forever, right? Like when you say it's like lasts a lifetime, well, like, it should really last like multiple lifetimes. Like it's never going to go bad. Like we can replace the wire in it. So that's really where it starts. And then if we're going to use all this energy, how can we start to reduce our negative impacts? And so I think it's like setting the standard and saying it is possible, right? And then also showing like where you want to get to and say, we're not there yet. You know, like I don't have the roof water capture thing. It's like we're projecting that. And you know, if 2025 I don't have it and I don't have the greenhouse, that's okay. And you can like tell me you didn't do it. I'm going to tell you that like I'm trying and we're going to get there, right? And we're committed to it. So we put it out there and we make it like public to our team, and a lot of times we'll put it in our marketing materials, and when it is legit, we can say we do it, we publish that, and we say we have intentions or we're on the plan to, we'll put it out there, because it like puts your feet to the fire. And we don't always win. I mean, you know, like if we bat 60% on all that stuff with the dates that I want, like I'm like, we're doing it.
You're in the Hall of Fame if you're at 60%.
Yeah.
Just because we're over our time, just to wrap it up a little bit, I always like to end a little bit on personal. You had mentioned even earlier just your creative outlets. What do you like to do personally just to unwind? Because you obviously are spending a ton of time organizing, balancing a number of different enterprises. You must have some sort of a off switch or a way to recharge.
Yeah, I think the making art stuff has been really impactful for me and been really good. And then I love to fish, specifically fly fishing. It's like the most immersive thing I've ever experienced besides blowing glass, and that's how I got so hooked on blowing glass. And so like everything fades away with that, and then probably cooking is the other thing, and hosting meals, you know, like, and that starts to just like make everything fade away as well. But you know, over the years, I've really learned like there's kind of this optimal level, right? And you exceed this, you think you can exceed this optimal level of like performance, we'll call it in business culture. And what ends up happening is you like push yourself, and then what happens is you're actually doing more work by the amount of time, and that optimal threshold is actually declining. And so like people have asked me like, do you sleep? And it's like, I sleep minimum 8 hours every night, like probably 10 if I, you know, most nights. And so I really prioritize sleep. I prioritized, you know, health and diet, and then time outdoors, time not in the urban environment, more like super urban here, and I love it. But then it's like a kind of, you know, it's a balance, right? You have to have both sides. And so like, I would say I try at least once a week to be in you know, a natural environment, and just like observing in whatever way. And typically that's like fishing. That's an activity where I can still have a pursuit, because I'm not good at sitting still. But that is for sure like a recharge for me.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, we are going to transition to the Q&A portion here for just a few minutes. And so maybe just for those that are going to listen to this later, I'll give up my mic, but then maybe just repeat the question so that our side mics pick it up. And then I'll go around and hand this out. So does anyone have any questions for Jackson?
Since glass is your passion and you had to divorce yourself from it for a while, focus on the business, now you say get back into it that once a week. Do you go into the whimsy, artistic, crazy, fun thing with glass blowing, or do you stick with the light fixtures? I mean, do you let yourself go and finally get to it again?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question was, now not working as in glass, like as the core of my profession. When I get to do it, I'm doing it once a week. Do I go into the whimsy and kind of the that direction or do I stick more with lighting? And so I don't make lighting, but at the same point, I love blowing glass because it's regimented and it's like a meditative act, right? And so when I was learning, I experimented a lot. I did a lot of that sort of whimsical experimentation and tried all these different techniques. And what's interesting now is that stuff doesn't stimulate me that much anymore. And I think it's largely because I explored a lot of that territory, and there's still more that's unexplored, but I kind of got far enough in that I could kind of see where those roads go. And so when I work in glass now, I actually want to make like the same form over and over and over again. So when I'm making artworks, they're installations of one form or a few different forms, and I'm making a lot of them. So for instance, like this year in the winter, we were making these spheres that are sealed, and we would make between 50 and 70 in a day. And to me, that's like, oh man, I leave that day feeling like, and I have 2 assistants, and we're like high-fiving and like feeling like, man, we just filled an entire kiln. And the repetition, we get into this groove where it's like, 2-3 hours in, the first hour we're making like 3 or 4 an hour. By like the 4th hour, we're making like 7. By the end of the day, we're making 10, and it's just like, you could almost close your eyes and the music's playing and it's hot in there when it's 25 below out. So it's really about the repetition and being present in place. And then as far as like an artwork, I've already conceived of kind of what the installation will look like, and then these are components for it.
Hi, I feel like this has been great. I have a million questions. I'll ask one. You said you love to think about the future, and I'm wondering if you've thought at all about succession planning or any kind of thing surrounding it. You're a young guy, but I'm just curious if that's something you've been thinking about.
Yes, so the question was, thinking about the future as a core part of what my role is, and have I thought about succession plans or, what the transition or evolution of the company is like. The funny thing is, like, I've thought about succession plans, I feel like from day one, because at the end of the day, like, I was a glassblower and an artist, right? And so there is an individualistic component to that, right? And we talk about community, but we still have to have our identity in the community. We have to have our individual identity. And I think like my dream has never been to be like a CEO and I think being a CEO is great. And I think if you can start something, it's awesome. That's never been like a, kind of like a milestone for me. I think I have done a lot of research on it actually, and I'm not there yet. I still have to learn more. I've looked into ESOPs, looked into a lot of different partnership structures where you can have a foundation own stuff. There's a lot of pros and cons with every single one of those, and I'm not going to get into all those. If you want to have a conversation about it, I'll share all of it. But ultimately, I can tell you what the succession is, not necessarily for me, but what is important in the succession is we should have glassblowers in downtown Minneapolis for generations, right? Because having people that create or make in a city builds character and builds identity for the city. And so that's part of the succession. However that happens, there's a lot of different roads we could take. But I'm not going to be here forever, and I'm also not going to be the one that's going to have, the next idea or the next version. And so my job is to set it up well enough and give it enough kind of values and intention that we can make sure that that's cemented for generations to come. How we get there, I don't know yet.
So, hi. Great podcast. So maybe more on the business side and less on the creative. What's a current situation, problem, focus, something that's in the business that you're working to overcome right now?
Oh, that's a good question. So on the business side, what's a current problem, challenge, focus that we're experiencing that we're looking to overcome? So I'll kind of give a little bit of a broad one and then kind of narrow it down. So we've been in about a 2-year process of up-leveling our brand and our product offering, and we weren't charging enough for our product. We couldn't, literally had people that are like, I got to get them like 30% more income because that's actually where they need to be for like market rate. specifically like makers. And we did a bunch of research on way behind it. It was like, okay, we're not charging enough for the product. We're actually undervaluing what we create. And so we did 3 price increases in the year. Plus we had this thing called inflation. It was pretty intense last year, as you all know. And so it was good timing actually to like really ramp up prices because people weren't like, why are you doing this, right? And so we had 3 price increases, and I mapped out the whole strategy. And 2 years ago, 75% of our business was in the commercial sector. When you start raising prices, right, like those are investor projects, and those budgets can only maintain a certain pricing level. And so we knew the business was going to have to change the core model, right? So I was like, we got to acquire a lot more residential business and business that the budgets are there, both residential and hospitality. And what I anticipated is happening is what I anticipated is that we would not be able to acquire and grow the audience enough as fast as the commercial business declined. Now, it was looking promising. However, the commercial market, with what's happened in the last 6 months with interest rates and just commercial office in general across the country, there's a lot of uncertainty in that market. So that business has really tailed off much faster than our residential business has grown. So anybody who's like been in a position where they have to make very critical decisions for their business, you have these moments where it's like you can tell you're in a really tough spot with your revenues and kind of your financial situation. And basically, if you evaluate your options, your best option is to hit the gas harder, meaning invest more heavily, which means burning cash faster. That's a really uncomfortable position to be in. But if you've been through a few of those rounds of doing that, you kind of go like, all right, well, you know what the alternatives are, is like try to cut your way out of it. And then you won't, there's situations where you can do that and it'll work. And then there's situations where you won't. So you have to assess what the like data tells you and what your business and then it's like kind of a gut check on top of that. So we're in a situation where like, basically I like have to ski downhill as fast as I possibly can with like skis that are like the wrong size or something, you know, like. And so basically it's like in the next 2 weeks, I've already like signed off, we're doing it. All right, get ready everybody. And so yeah, that's basically a position. We have the team, we have the product, we have the manufacturing. I'm like, okay, so all those boxes check. Who do I want to, do I want to bet against all this? Yes, I do, because I believe in it. And so, that's kind of a situation that we're in. And I've been in that a couple other times. And in other situations, I've done it where I've had to hit the gas pedal and exceed the speed limit. And then I've also hit the brakes really hard and gone the other direction when I felt like it was appropriate. And in the few times I've done it, I've made it out to the other side on both those. So I think for people that are newer entrepreneurs or younger in business, that's a really hard thing. I don't know how you help somebody with that, right? Because Mercedes knows what I'm talking about. We have email chains going back and forth about where are you at on this? Because you need a sounding board, right? You have a group of people that is your sounding board. And so that's a scenario we're in right now, and I feel fully confident that we're, our bank's going to probably be a little nervous for a few months, but I'm not, because I look at the foundation we built and I'm like, this is a way better company than we had 2 years ago. It's super strong, we're ready to go.
Just tell the bank to use a line of credit.
That's right.
Yeah.
When the world was collapsing and the pandemic hit, I just remember a really powerful image and campaign you all pushed out about a votive and putting it in the windows of restaurants. Can you talk about how that whole story came to be?
So the question was just around kind of telling the story of, it's called a ripple votive, so a candle votive, at the beginning of the pandemic, and what's kind of the backstory of that. So whole world gets shut down. We were all there, right? In our houses, or apartments, or backyards, or wherever. And so we gotta make, that's our DNA. So the worst thing that can happen to us collectively as a group is not to be able to make. And so we're okay, everything's on pause. What can we make that, it can be a kind of a gesture of, hope or solidarity or, just something that is positive. And so I'm friends with a lot of restaurateurs, specifically in the North Loop. I was on the North Loop Neighborhood Association board and know a lot of chefs because I worked in that industry. And so it was heartbreaking, because for anybody who's worked in a restaurant or owned one, you know how hard that business is and how much people really want to deliver joy. And so like seeing these things on social media one after another, like all these restaurants being like, we're closed, we're closed, we're closed, we're closed. And you just like have no idea, like, are these ever coming back, or like, so much uncertainty. And so I was like, what can we do that like we can create something to try to like illuminate, that's our world, how important these establishments are. And that industry was hit like by far the hardest, right? Because of just the whole nature of that situation. And so we had like some extra stock of graphite, which is the material we use for making molds for casting glass. And I was like, let's make a candle votive, and let's put some positive vibes out there. So we got like solar candles so that they would light up at night or whatever. And so I just started like, texting friends. I was like, hey, can I drop one of these off and put it in your window, light up at night, right? And so I did that, and then like the news picked it up or something, I don't remember. And then all of a sudden it's like all these people, like our sales team was like, we're getting like all these inquiries, like people want to buy these things. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is like as far from like a product thing that I like, And so I was like, all right, well, what can we do with this? We got people's attention. Let's raise some money. Like, so I was like, all right, who needs money right now? I was like, Second Harvest Heartland, I think, is an amazing organization. And they were doing this campaign, raising a lot of money. So I was like, all right, let's pivot on this, and let's try to sell these things, and 100% of the proceeds will go to them. And so I was like, okay, how many TV stations can I get on? How many radio? I was just like, basically, how many people can I get in front of? So I just like started doing outreach and got a whole bunch of stuff lined up, and we threw up a web page really quick and like started selling them. And it was like so funny because like our Shopify site, we had like DMs going inside the company that like my ops person is like texting me and putting in the DMs, would you stop going on the news? Like we've already sold like 1,500 of these things, and we like don't know how we're gonna make them. Common pattern there, So then we ended up just selling tons and tons of these votives. I can't remember the number, but it was a pretty insane amount. And we ended up raising like almost $30,000 in the period of like, I think it was like 6 weeks or something. It was really pretty quick. And glass blowers were working, So yeah, it was really cool. And so like our glass blowers were excited because they were like cranking out glass, and we supplied the construction trades. So that was considered like, they had this thing where, you could, it's part of infrastructure, and so we could have our shop running. So I was like, this is sweet, but nobody was buying lights because like everything was just like that first like 2 months, everything was just on timeout. And so I needed to like have our team like physically making something. So I think internally it had huge impacts for us to feel like we're accomplishing something.
Well, I don't know how we can end on a better story than that one. So I think we're going to wrap it up. And before we do, just a few things. Obviously, thank you to everyone here for making it possible. We really appreciate your support.
Thanks for listening to the Curious Builder podcast. If you like what you listen to, please give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It really means a lot. It's a great way for us to just understand what you like about the podcast and what we can keep doing. So like and review, and please share with your friends and family. Find out more at curiousbuilderpodcast.com.